Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of PBS 12, CBS 4, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for joining us. Joining me is political analyst and columnist for Colorado Politics, Eric Sondermann, and John Frank from the Colorado Sun. Tonight, our debates take a look at another of the statewide ballot issues, Amendment 76, which would amend an important line in the Colorado Constitution. Currently, the Constitution says every citizen in Colorado can vote. This amendment would change that to only citizens in Colorado can vote. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are Joe Stegel, supporting the amendment, and Roshan Bliss in opposition to the amendment. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. We have limited time, so let's get started. Eric, let me throw it to you first. Excuse me, John, let's go to you first with your question for Amendment 76.
Joe, why don't we start with you? As we just learned, this amendment changes essentially one word. Why is that necessary?
Well, it actually changes two words, every citizen to only a citizen.
Of course.
But not to belabor the point. Why is it important? Because there's some ambiguity to the language in this constitutional amendment, and we believe that it's important to clarify that the fundamental right that we all have as natural citizens or native citizens, the right to vote, is reserved for the citizens, the native citizens and the naturalized citizens. So that's why we believe this is an important language change, because the reason is, if you look at a simple dictionary definition of citizen, it's a resident of a city or town or municipality. And so that now tends to open the floodgate to let anyone vote other than native or naturalized citizens. And so we think it's important to establish what was intended with the original Constitution Amendment in the 1876 Colorado Constitution, which has been amended subsequently, which results in the language that we have here today. We're simply trying to clarify, codify what the intent is and what the meaning of the language is.
Roshan, do you see ambiguity here, and do you feel like it's necessary to address that?
No, we don't think that there's ambiguity. It is clearly and explicitly illegal for people who are not citizens to vote in Colorado elections already. The only ambiguity is when you leave out the whole sentence of the Colorado Constitution that defines voting eligibility, which says that every citizen of the United States who has attained the years of 18, or 18 years of age, that is, can vote. And I think that it's deceptive to say that this fixes a problem, because there is not a problem with non-citizens voting, but it also deceives us into believing that there's only one piece of this, because it actually keeps people who are under 18 from voting, which we just changed in Colorado when the Colorado Votes Act of 2019 allowed 17-year-olds to vote in primaries. So no, I don't think this is, some ambiguity that needs to be cleared up about whether citizens can vote. I think it's actually about figuring out if we are going to continue to allow young people to vote in our elections.
Joe, do you want to address that, the issue of the young people voting?
That's a red herring. This amendment, the language change to this amendment, has nothing and does not address the voting age that's already currently codified in the amendment. It doesn't touch that. So we're not saying anything regarding the voting age. So that's a red herring argument that it's simply spurious. It's meaningless.
So if this were to pass, 17-year-olds could still vote in party primaries as they are currently allowed under Colorado law, or would that change?
Well, that's a subject for another time. That may or may not be constitutionally allowed now. The statute was changed by the legislature. This is a constitutional amendment that dictates 18-year-old is the voting, that's a qualification for an elector. This amendment, the two-word change that 76 is proposing, has nothing to do with the age requirement on the elector qualification. Whether or not a 17-year-old can vote legally now today, that's an entirely different subject.
If I may, it is not a different subject. They are part of the same exact sentence. There's no period in the Constitution where it describes who may vote. This change, even though it only changes the word every to only a, affects the whole sentence, and it means that only a person who is 18 can vote, which would disenfranchise the 24,000 17-year-olds who are eligible to vote in Colorado primaries this year and would disenfranchise tens of thousands more every primary after this one. So to say that this just doesn't affect, that's a separate issue, is just wishful thinking. That's just not how the law works. If you change one piece of a law, one piece of a sentence in a law, the whole sentence is affected, and this will, in fact, disenfranchise tens of thousands of 17-year-olds.
Eric, let's go into some additional line of questioning.
Sure, I want to stay on the track we're on. I keep going back to a line I heard, I don't know when I first heard it, but if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So I want to talk about, and let me start with you, Joe, to get even more specific than we've been in the first few minutes about what is broken here. And are there specific instances you can point to of non-citizens having voted in elections where this would redress that? And secondly, do you or do you not support the intent of letting young people who are 17 but will be 18 by the time November rolls around to participate in primary elections?
Well, that's a two-part question. Let me begin with the first part. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We believe it is broken in that there's been a movement that voting is becoming a new civil right, whereas voting is a fundamental right, and it's enshrined in the Constitution, both the federal Constitution and the Colorado State Constitution. Those are fundamental rights. They're not civil rights. The folks are trying to make a conundrum out of the 14th Amendment, equal rights, everyone should be able to vote, regardless of their citizenship status. We're saying we want to codify that language to say only a citizen can vote. If the citizen is, second part of your question, if a citizen is 17 and they're allowed to vote under the state statute or the Constitution, we're not addressing that. If they're not, that's a subject for a different day. That's an argument for a different matter. This amendment simply deals with who is a qualified elector as to citizenship.
I get it, and before, I want Roshan to have a chance, but before we do that, can you point to specific instances where the citizenship requirement has been abused?
Well, I cannot give you a specific point and say it happened here, it happened there.
Yes.
No, but it seems to be a nationwide trend that we see in other states, other municipalities across the United States. We're taking a proactive stance in Colorado saying, we see what's going on nationwide, we don't want that to happen here. Again, voting is a fundamental right that we want to preserve for the native and naturalized citizens. And speaking of, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. If this does nothing, why is there such objection to it? If it's simply just a meaningless thing that doesn't affect anybody, why is the objection?
Well, that's sort of going to be my question to you, but Joe paved the way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it is one approach to it, Roshan, but another one is if it is harmless, what's the harm?
It is not harmless. That is why the Campaign for Real Election Protection, which is pushing for the No on 76 vote, is doing its work because this amendment has very clear harm to tens of thousands of people who could vote in the next primary but will not be able to because of the way that this amendment changes the Constitution. It's a little hard for me to listen to Mr. Stegel, who's a former lawmaker, to talk about this not having an effect on state law when the Constitution is the foundation and the allower of state law. If you change the Constitution, it will impact state law that currently says that 17-year-olds can vote in primary elections, and those people will no longer be able to vote. If the problem that the yes side wants to address is about citizens voting or non-citizens voting. First, that is not a problem. There have been countless studies on voter fraud that have failed to find any substantial evidence that there is significant participation in any way of non-citizens in U.S. elections here in Colorado or across the nation. Even President Trump's, task force on voter fraud that he created a few years ago disbanded after having found no serious evidence of all of the voter fraud that they have been searching for and using as the narrative for why we need to tighten voter ID laws and in fact suppress voters. This is about drawing out a bunch of folks who who are opposed to immigration in this country to vote, and we don't think that getting a few more conservatives to the polls is worth disenfranchising tens of thousands of young people who will become the next generation of our voters. And we need to teach them those positive habits of voting early and often now.
Let me jump in here and get to a part of the question that you brought up, Joe, about this, pointing to examples across the country. I've seen critics of this particular measure talk about the support it has from most fundraising coming from states like Florida. Is this a Colorado-based movement because of the Colorado Constitution, or is this something as part of a national movement from other states that may or may not reflect Colorado?
Well, I would argue it's both. One, we do have national support, and two, we do have local Colorado support. I'm a Colorado native, and I support this amendment. I'm helped pursue it. But I'd like to go to what Sean said about this is an anti-immigration amendment. And I find that, frankly, kind of offensive.
That's not what I said.
Well, let's clarify. Go ahead.
Well, if the first point he made, if a 17-year-old is a citizen and they're allowed to vote now, they still get to vote. This does not affect how a 17-year-old or a 17-and-a-half-year-old or an 18-year-old can vote, so long as they're a citizen.
With all due respect, Joe, that's just not how it works. That's not true.
Well, I think the amendment's fairly clear, Roshan. So only a citizen, whether they're 17 or 18 or formally 21. This is what the amendment does. Simply, it's a qualifier for an elector. The main qualifier that we're amending is it's defining that you especially and only can vote if you're a citizen.
It's not a long amendment. Do either one of you have the amendment wording that would either speak to this 18 versus 17 argument that we're having?
I don't have the amendment in front of me, but the problem is that the amendment does not actually list out the entire sentence of the Constitution that it is amending. And that is why we are saying that this is a deceptively worded ballot initiative. The whole sentence in the Colorado Constitution reads, "Every citizen of the United States who has attained 18 years of age, ... can vote," and that you just can't separate the citizenship part from has attained 18 years of age and hope that it's only going to have the effect that you want it to have. That's just not how lawmaking works. And Coloradans need to understand that if this amendment passes, tens of thousands of 17-year-olds who have been enfranchised to vote in primary elections that decide who will be even on the ballot to represent them will not be able to vote. And there will be no new qualifications or law or challenges to whether or not people who are not citizens can vote either. That is already legal, and this amendment will not change that.
Joe?
May I respond? I believe Roshan hasn't done his due diligence. I have a text of the measure. It says Colorado Constitution Amendment 7, Section 1, in the Constitution of the State of Colorado, comma, amend Section 1 of Article 7 as follows. Strike the words every citizen, add only a citizen, and then it continues on, of the United States who has attained the age of 18 years, comma, has resided in this state for such time as may be prescribed by law, comma, and has duly registered as a voter, if required by law, shall be qualified to vote in all elections. That's the amendment. A simple two-word change from every citizen to only a citizen. 3 words. We're not changing the age requirement or any other the other elector qualifications. So the idea that we're disingenuous or we're trying to pull one over the people is simply factually incorrect. It's simply a 3-word change from every citizen to only a citizen. Very clear word change.
John?
Let's dive into the issue a little bit. You've mentioned some other states that have changed the voting laws, and there are a few, Chicago, San Francisco, cities as well, who are doing this. And they can under this home rule law. My colleague at the Colorado Sun, Lucy Haggard, looked into the legal implications of this and finds that these home rule cities could be possibly usurped by this constitutional change. I'm wondering, one, is that the case? And why shouldn't a 17-year-old get to help pick the candidates that they'll vote for in November, or possibly a 16-year-old vote in a school board election, given that they're the ones going to school?
Well, that's a two-part question. So let me answer the first part first. Home rule cities, that's an issue. The home rule city, that issue has been decided. May v. Town of Mountain Village, 969 P2D 790 has already settled that question. And it says that a municipality, home rule city, can't change the statewide elector designation. At the local level, they can, so long as it doesn't affect a statewide issue. I mean, that's a quick down and dirty description of and it's a very narrow holding. So whether it changes a home rule's ability to do things, so long as they don't try to dictate statewide electoral qualifications, they can do what they want. So will it affect them if they try not to change the statewide electoral? And taking that to a hypothetical, it prevents the home rule cities from making changes to other constitutional amendments. And understand, a home rule city is bound by statute. This is a constitutional amendment, whether it's changed or not, whether the wording is changed the way it is or were proposed or not. It's a constitutional amendment which trumps Article 7, Section 1, trumps Article 20, which is the home rule municipality statute. This constitutional amendment trumps that. So long as the municipality, the home rule city, doesn't go beyond the dictates of the Constitution in any form, they can do what they want.
And to the issue, should we broaden elections to include some people who aren't 18 years of old and reach that citizenship status yet? For instance, in a school board election, where students can vote for the folks that set school policy.
Well, and I jokingly say that's an argument for a different day. Should they, shouldn't they? I'm not here to say whether they should or shouldn't. I'm here to debate Amendment 76 as it's worded. If someone wants to change the Constitution and say that 16 years old can vote, and it alleviates any of those questions, those legal concerns, whether they're constitutionally prohibited or constitutionally acceptable, that's not what this does. That's already enshrined in the Constitution. We're not affecting that. Should 17-year-olds be able to vote? That's a question for another day.
Roshan, let's dive into that issue because there could be potential legal impact. A lot of questions to unpack for the courts possibly after this. Why should a 17-year-old get a chance to vote in a primary, or a city maybe allow 16-year-olds to vote in school board races?
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you asked. I am here in lots of ways because I'm an advocate for young people's participation in our democracy. I've been supporting students since 2014 in the Jeffco student strikes over their school board election to pass a bill that is called the Student Voice, Student Vote Act that would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in their local school board elections. Because state laws are only allowed to be passed and put into effect if they are constitutional. That is why this law, our Student Voice, Student Vote Act, would become unconstitutional if this law, if this amendment passed. That is the same case for the Colorado Votes Act, which in 2019 allowed 17-year-olds to participate in primary elections if they would be 18 by the election. That law would suddenly become unconstitutional if Amendment 76 passed. That is how state law works. And we think that it's incredibly important to engage young people in our elections early because it is determinative of the voter participation of our entire country for generations to come. Research shows that the younger that you participate in your first election, the more likely that you will develop a habit of voting for the rest of your life. And we need, in a country that has some of the lowest turnout rates in industrial democracies in the entire world, our country needs young people who are going to be 37% of the electorate in this election, by the way. We need them to participate. We need them to get engaged as early as possible when they are still supported by their communities, by their schools, by their parents, before they turn 18 and their life turns upside down, they move on to college, start thinking about jobs, and forget to register to vote or update their registration after they move out of their parents' house. It is really important for those young people to engage because they will develop the positive habits of participating in elections. And there's another research documented effect called the trickle-up effect that shows that if young people in a household participate in elections, it is more likely that their parents, that their aunts and uncles, that their other people in their households will also vote. So this is really about increasing voter participation in the entire in our entire democracy, and by suppressing the youth vote, by passing 76, we are rolling back the clock on the gains we've made for youth participation in our elections by decades, and possibly for another generation to come, which is why 76 is so harmful to youth voter suppression.
Speaking of the clock, we're about just a few minutes away from our closing statements. Eric, I want to throw it to you for our next question, knowing that since we are a little bit closer to closing statements, ask our issue representatives to offer a little bit shorter questions as we get close. Eric?
Yeah, let me start with you on this one, Roshan, since it's been going the other direction most of the half hour. You brought up the immigration issue in a previous response. I'm trying to get to what is the purpose? Why are we here today? What is the purpose of this initiative? Even what are the motivations behind it? You obviously believe that it's related to the immigration issue. Could you discuss that?
It is well known that Citizen Voter Inc., the Florida-based political action committee that was started by John and Gina Loudon, who are members of Trump's Mar-a-Lago club, gave $4.27 million to this national effort, and over $1 million here to the Colorado effort. And it is just public knowledge that that group and many of its affiliates, many of its representatives have been trying to capitalize on the fact that anti-immigrant rhetoric polls well with conservative voters. And this, as far as we believe, we'll never know the insides of the hearts and minds of the people behind this initiative, but we believe that this is a cynical effort to turn out anti-immigrant voters to show up for the ballot who might not have participated and get them to vote. And if we want to, if the proponents feel like there needs to be clarification, there are many other ways for us to do this that don't disenfranchise tens of thousands of young voters.
And Joe, to you, is not it true that the group Citizens Voters Inc. and the people who are funding that, the Loudon family, have a history of being involved with anti-immigrant movements, and is this part of that larger picture?
Well, I've never met the Loudons, and while I may be cynical, I'm not cynical about a fundamental right to vote that I want to protect for the native citizens and the naturalized citizens more especially because they came to this country, they did what was right, they became a citizen, and by becoming a citizen, they earned the right to vote. So yes, I'm cynical about preserving the right, the fundamental basic right to protect our democracy, to protect our rights as citizens. A citizen should have the right to vote. Now, speaking about disenfranchising young people, if Roshan wants to take initiative up, change the language of section or Article 7, Section 1, and lower the voting age to 16, he's more than free to do so. Put a petition out, gather the signatures, put it on the ballot. But Amendment 76 doesn't touch the voting age. Young people can vote when they reach the voting age that a qualified elector is set forth in the article, whether or not that is 18 or 16 or 17. We're not trying to disenfranchise anyone.
But if I can just follow it up. The question was about immigration, and
okay.
I'll try to be quick, Dominic. The question was about immigration. And if this is not directed at, and you said that voting is now becoming more of a civil rights issue as opposed to a constitutional issue, if I'm quoting you earlier. If this is not about immigration, what is it about?
It's about preserving and protecting the fundamental right to vote, reserving that right to native and naturalized citizens. Immigrants who are not citizens do not have the legal right to vote. That's already in statute. This simply, the wording says, clarifies that language.
It is now time for our closing statements. As I say every time, a half hour goes by very quickly in the studio. We offer each of our representatives 30 seconds. A coin flip before the program determined that Roshan would go first. Roshan, your 30-second closing statement.
Thank you very much. We are here as a campaign against 76 to make sure that young people have their chance to be heard in our elections. Young people are the biggest growing demographic of voter participants in the country. They are 37% of the electorate, and their participation will determine the future of our democracy. it is so vital that we preserve young people's ability to exercise this fundamental right that our law grants them. So we are encouraging people to vote no on 76 to stop the effort to suppress youth voting. We also want to protect the ability for naturalized citizens to vote without fear or confusion about their status and their ability to vote. Vote no.
Thank you, Roshan. Joe, it's now time for your 30-second closing statement.
Thank you. I encourage a vote of yes on Initiative 76. It's going to preserve what's already fundamentally in the Constitution, and that is that only a citizen of the United States, whether naturalized or native, can vote in every election. This amendment doesn't affect any lawful, legal citizen, whatever age is allowable under the electoral parts of the Constitution, from voting. It doesn't affect immigration. It doesn't affect, it's not the status of any racial group, any gender group, anything is not affected by the simple language change if only a citizen is provided with the opportunity and the right to vote in Colorado.
Well, that is all the time we have for our debate looking at Amendment 76. I'd like to thank our issue representatives, Joe Stegel and Roshan Bliss. I'd also thank my fellow panelists, Eric Sondermann and John Frank. If you'd like to find out more information about any of these issues or the general election races, please be sure to go to our websites, pbs12.org, cbs4.com, and coloradosun.com. coloradosun.com, thanks to our friends John Frank, have done an explainer on every single ballot issue. If you're looking for information, you haven't watched all of our debates, be sure to go there and get some great information. We really appreciate you checking out these debates. Be sure to stay tuned. We're doing an entire ballot review up next in 30 minutes. We talk very quickly. For everybody here at PBS 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.